A strange thing happens when you listen closely to old memories. You can almost hear it again. Children calling from the street, a door closing gently, an afternoon stretching wide and unhurried. Back then, freedom wasn't announced or managed. It simply existed, shared quietly between neighbors who looked out for one another. We stepped outside and belonged to the day itself. Today, that world feels impossibly distant, yet it was once utterly ordinary. Could a childhood like that exist now, in our streets and towns? Stay with this story, because you won't believe how normal this once was for everyone. Most people forget how much the world slowed down back then. Britain, in the years after the war, was a country rebuilding itself, brick by brick, habit by habit. Streets were busier with people than with traffic, and homes were smaller but fuller, stitched together by routine and familiarity. Children grew up inside this rhythm, shaped by the pace of the nation around them. Days were organized by simple structures. School ended, coats were hung, and the outdoors waited. There were fewer distractions competing for attention, fewer voices calling from inside the house. Neighborhoods functioned like extended families, where names were known and expectations quietly understood. Adults shared responsibility, not through rules written down, but through presence. Housing estates, terraces, and villages created natural boundaries that felt safe rather than restrictive. Time moved differently because life demanded patience. You waited for things, planned for them, and filled the gaps with imagination. Childhood wasn't hurried along, it unfolded slowly, shaped by the steady certainty of everyday life. And that slower Britain left its mark on everyone growing up within it. Those conditions quietly defined what felt normal, long before anyone realized how completely that sense of normal would fade away forever. The front door mattered more than we ever realized. Once it closed behind you, the world opened up. Children drifted between pavements, parks, and back lanes with little direction beyond curiosity. Time wasn't tracked by watches or messages, but by the slow tilt of the sun and the familiar call to come home. Independence arrived early, not as a lesson, but as a lived experience. Learned step by step simply by being out there, making small choices and small mistakes along the way. Play itself didn't arrive neatly packaged. It was invented on the spot, shaped by whoever turned up and whatever was at hand. A patch of ground became a pitch, a wall became a target, and a quiet street transformed into an arena of endless possibilities. Arguments were settled quickly because the game needed to continue. Rules shifted, teams changed, and everyone learned how to get along. Boredom wasn't something to fear or fix. It was the pause that pushed imagination forward, the empty space where creativity learned to breathe. Then there were the small rituals that felt enormous at the time. A visit to the corner shop, a carefully chosen childhood novelty suite, a weekly routine that never lost its magic. Coins were counted twice, choices weighed carefully, and favorites remembered from one week to the next. These moments weren't about having lots. They were about waiting. Anticipation did most of the work. The joy lived in the build-up, in knowing something simple was coming and savoring it fully when it arrived. Every adult, it seemed, had a role. Neighbors noticed who belonged where. Shopkeepers remembered names and expected manners. Teachers were figures of steady authority whose words carried weight beyond the classroom walls. Guidance came from many directions, creating an invisible net that caught mistakes before they became habits. Childhood existed inside a shared moral landscape, where behavior mattered because everyone was watching, and everyone cared enough to speak up. School days moved at the same unhurried pace as everything else. Lessons followed predictable rhythms. Seasons marked the year. And playgrounds echoed with familiar games played the same way generation after generation. The boundary between school and home felt clear and reassuring. Pressures existed, but they were simpler, fewer, and easier to leave behind at the gate. Learning had space around it, room to settle rather than rush. Even evenings felt calmer, shaped by routine rather than constant interruption. Looking back now, it's tempting to think this all sounds idealized, even rare. But it wasn't special. This wasn't a golden version reserved for a lucky few. It was just normal, ordinary days repeated quietly across Britain, shaping generations without announcement. And it's only when we compare it to childhood today that we realize how much of that ordinary world has slipped away, leading us gently toward what those experiences truly gave us later in life. What those childhoods quietly gave us lasted far longer than the days themselves. We learned how to negotiate, how to wait, how to read people without needing explanations. Confidence grew naturally, shaped by scraped knees, shared laughter, and the feeling of belonging somewhere familiar. Patience wasn't taught. It was absorbed, learned through waiting turns, saving small coins, and filling long afternoons with our own ideas. As the years passed and childhood itself began to change, those lessons stayed tucked away. The world grew faster, louder, more organized, yet something steady remained underneath. Not everything was better, and no era is perfect, but there was a grounding sense of connection that shaped who we became. The memories stayed, even as the world moved on, reminding us that growing up was once as much about community as it was about family. Perhaps that quiet foundation explains why those years still feel solid. Would it work today, that slower, looser way of growing up? Modern childhood brings protections, technology, and structure our younger selves never knew, and those changes matter. Yet it's hard not to wonder what might be worth carrying forward from the past. The trust, the time, the shared watching over one another. Perhaps nothing needs turning back completely. Maybe Britain didn't just lose a childhood. Maybe it misplaced a way of growing up together.